If your Airtable base feels messy, duplicated, and it's hard to report on, there's a good chance that you're using Airtable as a spreadsheet. The feature that changes this is linked records. Linked records are what let Airtable stop acting like a grid of rows and columns and really evolve into a true business solution. Here's an example of what Airtable can look like if you're using it as a spreadsheet. You have the same repeated information typed over, and it looks different in multiple instances. Maybe it's CO period, maybe capitalized. All the information looks similar, but it's not really talking, and it's not interconnected. When somebody is assigned to something, if it's not actually tying to a record, then really what you're doing is causing duplicative data entry and making it impossible to draw any kind of real analytics or insights from your data. We're going to solve this in this video by breaking down exactly what it means to create linked records in Airtable and demonstrate why they are so powerful. So if that's of interest, stick around and let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Gareth and this is Gap Consulting. And it's our mission here to help you unlock the full potential of Airtable and related no-code tools. And in this video, we're going to be diving into a core concept within Airtable. It's all about linked records. What are they? Why are they so important? And how does it empower Airtable to be so much more than just a spreadsheet? Well, let's break down the core problem. Spreadsheets are flat information, rows and columns, 2 dimensions. And what Airtable allows us to do is build a third layer so that not only do we have rows and columns, but we can also tie objects together. Airtable works best when things get their own table. Linked records then allow us to connect those things across the database. So now we have a relationship between 2 different objects that are connected. And this way we don't get stuck entering a lot of the same information. We don't have to spell out the same names. We don't have to fill out all of the redundant data. And that means we have cleaner data that is more accurate for reporting. What we build to here is a single source of truth that is driven by one object at a time. Instead of having repetitive information throughout, we link to the actual thing that we want to connect to. So diving back into our example, what we have is one table. Everything is just flat, rows and columns. There's no information being connected throughout here. What we are working toward is instead building different tables, and each table houses that particular thing. So maybe that is our projects, or maybe that is our tasks, or our clients. And then we can connect all of these components together, and that's where we start driving the Airtable value of a single source of truth. So what is a linked record? Well, Airtable allows us to create the connection between 2 different objects in the same database. So we're connecting usually 2 different tables. In the case of projects, as they relate to clients, a project is done on behalf of a client. So we would have 2 different tables, one for projects, one for clients, and then we connect them together so that when a project is kicked off or created, it is done on behalf of a client. It's assigned to a client that already exists in the database. Rather than typing out the client name every single time we do a new project for them, we simply connect the project record to the client record, allowing these things to talk. So a linked record is basically a relationship between 2 records in the same database. A project belongs to a client. A task belongs to a project. An invoice belongs to a project or to a client. Instead of typing the same information over and over again, we build the client once and then we connect to it, or we build the invoice once and connect to it throughout our system. So let's dive back into our example, and we will start by building the objects first. So here we're going from a flat 2-dimensional spreadsheet to creating the tables. Let's create a client table. Let's create a table for projects. We'll create one for tasks and one for invoices. Now, by default, when we build these new tables, they're going to have all of this information. For the sake of our example, I'm going to delete it, and we will start with a blank slate for each of our new tables. So let's start then with our clients. What kind of information do we store for our clients? Obviously, we have a name for the client, but we would also carry information like email. So we can add all these different fields to our client table that relate to the client. These are client-specific fields. And then we do the same thing for projects. If we have like a start date and we have an end date for the project, we can add all of this information here to the project level. So the core takeaway here is that every piece of information that we add, it's added to the database at the level where it lives. So if it's a project date, put it in the projects table. If it's a task-specific date, like a due date, then put it here. If it's an invoice total, well, then it belongs in the invoices table. You get the idea. But once we have our tables built, now what we need to do is get them talking. So let's go back to our example where we don't do a project in a vacuum. A project is done on behalf of a client. So let's set up the relationship. We can link to the client. We can do this by simply finding the name of the table, or we could just start typing link. And when we select link to another record, we're building the linked relationship from one table to another. Now, a couple of rules are going to apply here. When we build this link, it will create the link on both sides of the equation. So if we're connecting, as in this case, a project to a client, then when we look at the client table after this, the client will also be linked to the project. So let's build that relationship. We're in the projects table. We're linking to the client. Here we can name the field whatever we'd like, and we can choose whether or not a project can be assigned to multiple clients at the same time or just one. In this case, because it's a project done on behalf of a client, I will assume that there's only one client ever linked to a project at a time. So I'll toggle that off. Now, there are other options here that are slightly more advanced, like what do we want to show as the display name? Do we want to limit the records to a specific view or by a condition or use AI? None of that is needed for building the framework. The first thing to focus on is building the best frame possible for your database. So let's put all of that aside for the purpose of our video here and just create our field. We have a relationship now from projects to clients. And if I go to clients, as we mentioned, the opposite part of that relationship or the reciprocal of the relationship is also built. So clients are now linked to projects, and we'll see the same connections here. Now, in this sense, a client might have multiple projects with us. We might do different projects over time for the same client. So we do want to keep this toggled on. Remember, every time you build a linked record, to always ask yourself this question from both sides of the equation. In our example, does a project link to more than one client at a time? Does a client link to more than one project at a time? This might take a little bit of practice to get right, but once you understand the core concept, you'll be all set. Now, if you've ever wondered why your Airtable base keeps getting messy, this is usually where problems start. So drop a comment below this video and tell us what it is you're trying to build, because getting this structure right from the beginning matters more than you might think. Now let's dive back into our example and take it a little bit further. Let's focus on 3 core tables. So we've got our clients, and I've filled out some information here. We have the name of the client, the website, and the contact, the main contact at that particular company. And then for our projects, we have a start date, an end date, and a name. And of course, we have the linked relationship that we just built between the project and the client. But now we want to go a layer deeper and look at tasks. So we have a name for different tasks, a due date, and then an owner. So let's think about how tasks relate to our other 2 tables. Does the task get assigned to the client specifically? Usually not. In most cases, the task is a part of the project. So the task is essentially assigned to a project. It's a subsection of the project. So we can build the linked relationship there. Let's watch again what it looks like to build that. You can simply search for a new field type after selecting the plus here. We're going to add the link to another record, and we want to make sure we select the proper table. In this case, that is the projects table, and we can name it however we'd like. We can call it link to projects. And then, of course, the last question that we have to ask ourselves is, can a task be assigned to multiple projects? Usually the answer is no. A task is going to link to one project and one project only. So toggle this off. Create the field. Look at the other side of the equation. The projects now link to tasks. Ask the same question. Can a project link to multiple tasks? Usually the answer here is yes. So we'll keep this toggled to multiple records. So now, rather than typing in all of that information over and over again, like we did in our initial example, the way not to do it, now all we have to do is link to the object that matters here. So let's take this example. Acme Co., as you can see, had the website redesign project. So we can link this from either side of the equation. Acme Co. is linked to projects. Find the project from the list of projects. This is demonstrating the different project objects that live in the projects table, and select the website redesign. Once we build that connection, it's also going to connect the project to the client from the other side of the equation. So understanding that this is reciprocal throughout is a really important concept when building linked records. Same thing with tasks. We might have 3 tasks assigned here: prepare for project kickoff, review client requirements, and draft initial proposal. When we go over to our tasks, you're going to see that those are now linked to the website redesign. So in this way, we're eliminating the need of data redundancy, because we're not typing the same thing over and over again. And also, we're able to now report on this. We could build formulas that know how many tasks there are per project, how many of them are completed, what the overall status of a project is based on the tasks, or what the lifetime value of a client is because of how many projects they have done with our company and the value of those projects. All of this is now interrelated, and we can build a true system thanks to the proper structure from the beginning. Once we have everything connected, now it's time to really lean into the system and use it, because we're not sitting in a place of redundant data entry. Without linked records, client names get misspelled, emails get duplicated, and project status becomes really hard to summarize. Reporting breaks, automations become fragile, and interfaces get messy. But with linked records, every object is now a source of truth. Relationships are properly structured, and you can see related data on either side of the relationship. This enables us to build interfaces, automations, and overall business workflows much more cleanly. The purpose of linked records, it's not just organization, it's about data integrity. When you have the same client that's typed 15 different times throughout your system, each one might look similar, but you're not actually reporting on a single source of truth for that client object. You really just have 15 different pieces of text that happen to look similar. But when the client exists in the client's table and everything links to it appropriately, now you've gone beyond spreadsheets and you have a true system. If you're looking at your own Airtable base right now, thinking that it has grown into a big, messy spreadsheet, this is exactly the type of thing that we help teams overcome. We offer a free strategy call where we can walk through your setup, take a look at what you've built, and help you understand how to move forward and if Airtable is the right fit. I'll link that strategy call below. Now that you know how to link tables, let's talk through the different types of linked relationships that you can build in a solution. These are pretty simple and straightforward once you understand the key mechanics behind building a linked relationship. So let's talk first through the ones that we have already built. We have a link from projects to a client. This links to one client. One project links to one client. But on the other side of this, one client can link to many projects at the same time. This is one type of a relationship that you can build in Airtable, and it's called a one-to-many. One project to one client, but one client to many projects. So you might see this written as 1 to n, 1:n, which just means one thing on one side links to potentially multiple on the other. Now, another type of relationship that we can have isn't one that we built here, but it's possible in Airtable. It's called a many-to-many. With this, you would have allow linking to multiple records toggled on from both sides of the relationship. So, of course, it doesn't pertain to our example, but if a project could have multiple clients and a client could be connected to multiple projects, this is now many-to-many. This can be written as n:(m) or n2m, both of these just signifying variables, that it's a number beyond one. The other and final type of relationship you can build is called a one-to-one. This is where both sides of the equation have only one thing that they can link to. Again, this is not our example, but if a client was only ever allowed to have one project at a time, it would look like that. And this is a one-to-one because on both sides of the equation, we've said it can only connect to one thing at a time. So one project to one client to one project. You'll see this written as 1:1 or 1-to-1. And it basically means that for that relationship, it's just going to one record on each side of the equation. Now, we've done a lot of content on the next level of this, but I want to give you a quick taste in this video. Once you have these connections properly built, all of the information throughout your database is accessible at all of the layers at which information is connected. So, take, for example, our projects. We know the start date and the end date because it lives at the project level. We can now bring that information in to the client level and to the tasks level if we want. So let's say at the task level, we want to know when does this project kick off and when does the project end. This would allow us to reach through the linked relationship, in this case to website redesign. And we want to pull in this start date and this end date that live at the project's object or the project level, and we want to bring it into the tasks table. So we can do this with lookup fields. And this is only available because we have the proper linked relationship already built. So we can add a lookup field to look up the start and the end from the project, and we're inheriting that information or bringing it into the tasks level through the linked relationship. Now, if this changes, if this particular task does not really belong to website redesign, but it's instead on member onboarding, you'll notice that when I make that change, the lookup fields also change. So there are many different relationship types that you can build through your data once you have the links in place. You can have lookups, rollups, complicated formulas, all kinds of information can start to flow through your database thanks to the proper structure that you built with linked relationships. If this is helpful, as I said, we've done a ton of content on these topics and we will continue to publish more content like this, so be sure to subscribe to the channel and thumbs up on the video to get more content like this in your feed. Now, for some closing thoughts, I want to give you some mistakes that we see when building linked records. So if you're new to this concept, you might want to check against these common mistakes to make sure that you've embraced your linked records correctly. So number one is to use text fields like linked records. We demonstrated this at the beginning when we showed the imported table here that had a very flat layout. We were bringing in client names rather than linking to the client. We didn't link to the proper projects. Instead, we had typed it in to the text field. So if you find yourself doing this, you're probably not using linked records appropriately. Number two is actually the other side of that. Sometimes people create too many tables too early. So if you find yourself building a bunch of tables that feel unwieldy, well, it's probably because you've created too many tables. Each table should represent an object in Airtable, a thing. So in our example, clients, projects, tasks. If you've got so many of these and you can't clearly articulate why you need a different object for each of those, you might have gone overboard on building too many tables, and that leads to overcomplication when it comes to your linked relationships. So we've got two sides of the same coin: undersimplifying by text, overcomplicating by too many tables. A third common mistake is to not name things properly inside of the table where they live. So let's look at clients. If we have our clients here, but the first thing we surfaced was their website, for example, well, then when you went to link to that client and you saw the website instead of the client name, that would make it really hard to understand what's going on. So this leftmost field is called the primary field. Generally, that's what you choose to see when you set up a linked relationship. So make sure that this field actually describes what it is that you're storing here. If it's a project, make it the project name. If it's the clients, make it the client name. You get the idea. But that leftmost field usually should demonstrate what it is that's there. Now, I say usually, you do have the option of choosing a different display name when you link. So if you wanted to use the website instead of the name of the client, you could. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to do that here because I don't know who the client is that is at acme.example. So I prefer not to use this, and I tend to always use the primary field, which will demonstrate that leftmost field. But do know that if you make that change, you can always update the primary field and update the display name accordingly. The fourth common mistake is making it so that it's hard for your users to actually find the right linked relationship. This really goes into more of those advanced features that we talked about briefly earlier in the video. So if you wanted to make sure that you weren't showing hundreds or thousands of different records at a time, you might filter what people see when they go to link to another record. So for example, you might set up a rule that says when I'm linking to tasks, I can only link to a task that is due in the future. Because if it's due in the past, I don't need to see it. I don't need to clutter up the list of possible tasks. So you handle that by filtering records by a selection or filtering them by a view. So this way you can choose what records people are allowed to link to, and that will simplify the user experience so they don't get a lot of messy information in front of them at once. And the fifth common mistake that we see is people assuming that this linked relationship will happen automatically. Just because you build the link between projects and tasks, it does not mean that when you create a new task, it will automatically link to a project. You have to either manually link them together or use an automation or AI to build that link. If the objects aren't intentionally linked together, just having the linked field here is not sufficient. So make sure that you're actually linking your data, not just building the linked relationship. Think about the linked relationship kind of as the highway, and you still have to get the car from one place to the other. That's it for this video. By now, you know the ins and outs of setting up a linked relationship in Airtable and why it's so valuable to help you with your source of truth for your business outcomes. I hope you got a ton of value from this. If, as you watched this, you started to feel a little bit unsure about your Airtable setup, and maybe you're not sure what the next best step for you is, swing by our website and schedule your strategy call. Our team will meet with you on that call and walk through your system and help you validate whether Airtable is the right fit for your project or not, and what your next steps should be. I hope you got a ton of value here. Give us that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you get more content like this, but most importantly, keep on building.